This story is inspired by real-life situations and includes fictional elements for entertainment. Not recommended for viewers under 18.
The first time Ethan Caldwell realized his marriage was over, there was no screaming, no broken glass, no dramatic goodbye. Just a message. A single line on a glowing phone screen that didn't belong to him. Last night meant more than it should have, and suddenly, everything did. Ethan Caldwell had always believed that silence could be a form of peace. That was before he learned it could also be a form of distance. The apartment was quiet in a way that didn't feel natural anymore. Not the comfortable quiet that came after a long day, when two people could exist in the same space without needing to fill it. This was different. This silence had edges sharp, almost deliberate. Vanessa stood by the kitchen island, scrolling through her phone, her expression unreadable. The soft glow of the screen reflected in her eyes, making her look distant, almost untouchable. Ethan watched her from the living room. He had been watching her more often lately. Not in a suspicious way, not at first. It started as something subtler. A curiosity. A feeling that something had shifted, just slightly out of alignment. Like a picture frame tilted a few degrees off center. "You're home late," he said casually, though he already knew the answer. "Work," Vanessa replied without looking up. "We're closing a deal this week." Ethan nodded slowly. That had become her answer for everything. Work. It used to impress him. Her ambition, her drive, the way she carried herself like someone who belonged in every room she entered. But lately, it felt more like a wall than a trait. "When's the last time we had dinner together?" he asked. This time, she looked up. Not with irritation, not even defensiveness, just distance. "I don't know," she said honestly. "It's been busy." Busy. Ethan almost smiled at the word. It sounded so harmless, so reasonable, but it had become the most dangerous word in their marriage. Because busy meant cancelled plans. Busy meant unanswered questions. Busy meant slowly disappearing without ever actually leaving. He stood up and walked toward the kitchen, stopping just a few feet from her. "I miss you," he said quietly. For a brief moment, something flickered in her eyes. Not guilt, not love, something closer to recognition, like she understood what he meant, but didn't know what to do with it. "I'm right here," she replied, but she wasn't, and they both knew it. Later that night, Ethan lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Vanessa slept beside him, her breathing steady, her body turned slightly away. There had been a time when they couldn't fall asleep without touching. A hand on an arm, a leg tangled with another, some small unconscious connection that said, "I'm here, you're not alone." Now there was space between them, not much, just enough to matter. Ethan turned his head and looked at her. He tried to remember when things had started to change. There wasn't a single moment, no clear breaking point, just a slow erosion. Conversations becoming shorter, laughs becoming rarer, touches becoming optional. He closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. Maybe this was normal. Maybe this was what happened after years of marriage. The intensity faded, the excitement softened. People grew comfortable. But this didn't feel like comfort. It felt like absence. The next morning it happened. Not with a crash, not with a revelation, just a moment. Vanessa was in the shower when her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Ethan wasn't the type to check her phone. He never had been. Trust had never required proof between them. But something about the way it buzzed once, then again, pulled his attention. He glanced at it. Just a glance. The screen lit up with a message preview. A name he recognized immediately. Richard Halvorsen. Ethan frowned slightly. Her boss. The message wasn't long, just one line. But it was enough. Last night meant more than it should have. Time didn't stop. There was no dramatic shift in the air. The shower kept running, the city outside kept moving, and yet something inside Ethan went completely still. He stared at the screen for a long moment, waiting. For what? He didn't know. Another message came through. "We need to be careful. Careful." Ethan let out a quiet breath. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something colder, something sharper. Clarity. Because suddenly everything made sense. The late nights, the distance, the silence. It all aligned into a single undeniable truth. He picked up the phone, not to scroll, not to dig deeper, just to hold it, as if feeling its weight might somehow change what it contained. But it didn't. The truth remained exactly where it was, unmoved, unapologetic, real. The bathroom door opened. Steam drifted into the room as Vanessa stepped out, drying her hair with a towel. She froze when she saw him, standing there, holding her phone. Neither of them spoke at first. They didn't need to, because in that moment, there was no more silence left to hide behind. Vanessa didn't drop the towel. She didn't rush forward to grab the phone or demand an explanation. She simply stood there, water still tracing slow lines down her bare shoulders, her damp hair clinging to her collarbone. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the faint hiss of steam escaping the bathroom. Ethan watched her, Not like a husband confronting his wife, more like a man observing something he didn't quite recognize anymore. Say something, he said finally. His voice was calm, too calm. Vanessa's eyes flickered briefly to the phone in his hand, then back to his face. There was no panic there, no scrambling for excuses, just a quiet, measured stillness. How much did you see? She asked. Ethan almost laughed. It wasn't a bitter laugh, not even an angry one, just disbelief. Enough, he replied. She nodded once, as if confirming something she had already accepted. Then she walked past him, just like that. No urgency, no fear. She crossed the room, opened her closet, and began pulling out clothes, as if it were any other morning, as if nothing irreversible had just happened between them. Ethan turned slowly, watching her. You're not even going to deny it? He asked. Vanessa paused for a fraction of a second, then slipped on a blouse. No. The word landed softly, but it hit harder than anything else she could have said. Ethan felt something shift inside him, not breaking, not exploding, just rearranging, like the foundation of something he had built his entire life around had quietly collapsed without warning. How long? He asked. This time she hesitated, not because she didn't want to answer, but because she was deciding how honest to be. A few months, she said. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. A few months, he repeated. And you thought I wouldn't notice? Vanessa sighed, finally turning to face him fully. I thought you did notice, she said. That caught him off guard. What? I thought you felt it, she continued, her voice steady. The distance, the way things changed. Ethan stared at her. I felt something, he admitted. I just didn't think it was this. Vanessa gave a small, almost sad smile. There's a difference between us, Ethan. And what's that supposed to mean? It means you still believed we were something we stopped being a long time ago. The words settled into the room like dust. Slow, inevitable. Ethan set the phone down on the nightstand, his fingers lingering on it for a second longer than necessary. So what? He asked. You just moved on? While still living here? While still being my wife? Her expression didn't change. I didn't plan it, she said. It just happened. Ethan shook his head slightly. No, he said. That's not how this works. Things don't just happen. You don't accidentally fall into someone else's bed. Vanessa didn't flinch. It wasn't about the bed. Then what was it about? His voice sharpened, just slightly. Because from where I'm standing, it looks pretty simple. For the first time, something flickered across her face. Not guilt, frustration. It was about feeling seen, she said quietly. Ethan froze. The words hit somewhere deeper than he expected. Seen? He repeated. Yes. Vanessa stepped closer now, not defensively, but deliberately. Do you know the last time you actually looked at me? She asked. Ethan frowned. I'm looking at you right now. No, she said, shaking her head. You're reacting to me. That's not the same thing. He didn't respond, because part of him, some quiet, uncomfortable part, understood what she meant. Vanessa continued, her voice softer now, but no less cutting. For years, Ethan, we've been living next to each other, not with each other. You had your work, I had mine. We stopped talking about anything that mattered. That's not an excuse. I'm not saying it is. Then what are you saying? She exhaled slowly. I'm saying this didn't start with Richard. That name hung in the air between them, heavy, real. Ethan looked away for a moment, processing. So when did it start? He asked. Vanessa didn't answer right away. Instead, she sat down at the edge of the bed, her posture suddenly more tired than composed. I don't know, she admitted. Maybe the first time we chose silence over a difficult conversation. Maybe the first time we stopped asking each other if we were okay. Ethan let out a quiet breath. That's a convenient way to rewrite things. It's not rewriting, she said. It's just finally saying it out loud. The room felt smaller now, like the walls have closed in around them. Ethan walked to the window, staring out at the city below. Cars moved, people crossed streets. Life continued, completely unaware that his had just shifted into something unrecognizable. And him? Ethan asked without turning around. Is he in love with you? Vanessa didn't answer immediately. I don't think that's the right question, she said. Ethan turned back, his expression harder now. Then what is? The question is, why that matters to you. Ethan let out a sharp breath. Are you serious right now? I mean it, she said. Would it hurt less if it was meaningless? If it was just physical? Ethan didn't respond, because the answer was obvious. No, it wouldn't. Vanessa nodded slightly, as if she had expected that. That's why I didn't lie, she said, because the truth is already enough. Silence fell again, but this time it wasn't empty. It was full of things neither of them could take back. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, at the woman he had built a life with, at the stranger sitting in front of him. "So what now?" he asked. Vanessa held his gaze. "I don't know," she said, and for the first time, that sounded like the most honest thing she had said all morning. Ethan nodded slowly, not in agreement, not in understanding, just acknowledgement. Then he grabbed his jacket from the chair. "I'm going out," he said. Vanessa didn't stop him, didn't ask where, didn't ask when he'd be back. "Okay," she replied quietly. Ethan paused at the door. For a brief second, it felt like there should be something more, a final word, a question, a reason to stay, but there wasn't, so he opened the door and walked out. The hallway outside their apartment felt colder than usual, or maybe it was just him. Ethan stepped into the elevator, watching his reflection in the mirrored wall. He expected to see anger, rage, something loud and undeniable, but all he saw was stillness, a quiet, unsettling calm that didn't belong in a moment like this. Because somewhere deep down, the part of him that should have shattered was already gone. As the elevator doors opened into the lobby, Ethan reached for his phone. His thumb hovered over the screen. There was one name he couldn't ignore: Claire Halvorsen, Richard's wife. For a moment he hesitated. This wasn't his world. Not yet. But it was now, and whether he liked it or not, she was already part of it. Ethan exhaled slowly, then pressed call. The line rang once, twice, then... "Hello?" Her voice was calm, unaware. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. "Hi," he said. "You don't know me, but I think we need to talk." Claire Halvorsen chose the cafe because it was neutral, not too intimate, not too exposed. A place where conversations could disappear into the background noise of clinking cups and quiet conversations, where strangers could say dangerous things without anyone really listening. She arrived 10 minutes early, not because she was eager, because she needed the time. Claire sat by the window, her posture composed, her hands wrapped around the cup of coffee she hadn't touched. Outside, Manhattan moved in its usual rhythm, taxis cutting through traffic, people walking with purpose, lives unfolding with indifferent precision. Inside, everything felt suspended. She had almost cancelled, 3 times. The call from Ethan Caldwell had been polite, controlled, but there was something underneath it, something she recognized immediately. Not anger, not confusion, clarity. And that was what unsettled her the most, because clarity meant truth, and truth meant there was no more room for denial. When Ethan walked in, she knew it was him instantly. There was something about the way he carried himself, too still, too focused, like a man holding something heavy, something invisible. Their eyes met briefly, no smiles, no introductions needed. He walked over, pulling out the chair across from her. "Claire," he said. "Ethan." Their voices were measured, careful, as if both of them understood that one wrong word could tip something fragile into chaos. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just looked at each other, studying, measuring, recognizing. "You already know," Ethan said finally. It wasn't a question. Claire held his gaze. "Yes," she replied. Ethan blinked once, caught off guard. "You do?" She nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "I didn't know for sure," she clarified, "but I suspected." Ethan leaned back slightly in his chair, exhaling through his nose. "How long?" Claire looked down at her coffee for a moment, as if the answer was somewhere in the dark surface. "Long enough to stop asking questions," she said. That answer landed heavier than he expected. "Why didn't you confront him?" Ethan asked. Claire's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Because I already knew what he would say." "And what's that?" "That I was imagining things, that I was being insecure, that I didn't understand the pressure he was under." Her tone wasn't bitter, just tired. Ethan nodded slowly. "Vanessa didn't deny it," he said. "Not for a second." Claire's eyes flickered slightly at that. "No," she murmured. "Richard wouldn't either. Not if he knew you had proof." The way she said it, calm, precise, told Ethan something important. This wasn't new to her. Not really. "You've been living with this," he said. Claire looked up at him again. "Yes." There was no hesitation in her voice now. No avoidance. Just truth. A waiter passed by, asking if Ethan wanted anything. "Black coffee," he said without thinking. When the waiter left, the silence returned. But it felt different now. Less uncertain. More shared. Ethan leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the table. "I saw the messages this morning," he said. "From Richard." Claire didn't react outwardly, but something in her eyes tightened. "What did they say?" Ethan hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then, "Last night meant more than it should have." Claire closed her eyes briefly. Not in shock, not in pain, just acknowledgement. "And?" she asked. "We need to be careful." A quiet breath left her lips. Careful, of course. That was always the word people like Richard used. Not sorry, not wrong. Careful. As if the only mistake was getting caught. Claire opened her eyes again, looking at Ethan with a kind of quiet understanding. "I'm sorry," she said. Ethan frowned slightly. "For what? For you having to find out like that?" He let out a small, humorless laugh. "I don't think there's a good way to find out something like this." "No," she agreed softly. "There isn't." The coffee arrived. Neither of them touched it. Because this wasn't a conversation people had over coffee. This was something else entirely. "Why did you call me?" Claire asked after a moment. Ethan considered the question. "I don't know," he admitted. "At first, I think I just wanted to confirm it, make it real. And now?" He looked at her, really looked at her, at the composure she wore so effortlessly, at the quiet strength beneath it, at the exhaustion she didn't bother hiding. "Now I think. I just didn't want to be the only one who knew." Claire's expression softened slightly. "That makes sense," she said. Another pause. Then she added, "It's a very lonely kind of knowledge." Ethan nodded. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It is." Outside, the sky had shifted slightly. Clouds gathering, dimming the light. Inside, something between them was changing too, subtly, unspoken. "What are you going to do?" Claire asked. Ethan leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know yet," he said. "Part of me thinks I should leave, just walk away. And the other part," he hesitated, "wants to understand how we got here." Claire studied him for a moment. "That part is more dangerous," she said. "Why?" "Because it keeps you connected to something that's already broken." Ethan looked down at his coffee, finally picking it up. "But what if it's not completely broken?" he asked. Claire didn't answer right away, because she knew that question. She had lived inside it for years. Finally, she said, "Then you have to decide how much of yourself you're willing to lose trying to fix it." The words lingered, heavy, honest. Ethan met her eyes again. "And you?" he asked. "Why did you stay?" Claire held his gaze. For the first time, something cracked. Just slightly. "Because living is harder than people think," she said quietly. "It's not just about walking away from a person. It's walking away from a life. A version of yourself." Ethan nodded slowly. He understood that. More than he wanted to. They sat there for a while longer, not speaking, just existing in the same space. Two strangers connected by something neither of them had chosen, but both of them had to face. Finally, Claire glanced at the time. "I should go," she said. Ethan nodded. "Yeah." They both stood. For a brief moment, it felt like there should be something more, a conclusion, a decision. But this wasn't the kind of story that offered those so easily. "Thank you," Ethan said. Claire paused. "For what?" "For being honest." She gave a small, almost sad smile. "I think we're past the point of lying," she said. Then she turned and walked away. Ethan watched her leave. Something about the way she carried herself stayed with him. Not fragile, not broken, just enduring. He sat back down slowly, staring at the half-empty cup in front of him. He had expected this meeting to give him answers, closure, something solid to hold on to. Instead, it had given him something else, perspective, and somehow, that felt even more unsettling. As he stepped back out into the city, his phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from Vanessa. "Are you coming home tonight?" Ethan stared at the screen for a long moment, then locked his phone without replying, because for the first time, home didn't feel like a place anymore. And somewhere, in a quiet corner of the city, Claire Halvorsen sat alone in her car, her hands resting on the steering wheel, her reflection staring back at her through the windshield. For years, she had chosen silence, convincing herself it was strength, that enduring was the same as surviving. But now, the silence had been broken, and there was no going back. The second time Ethan met Claire, it wasn't planned. At least, that's what he told himself. It happened 3 days after the cafe. 3 days of silence at home. 3 days of Vanessa moving through the apartment like a polite stranger, careful, composed, distant in a way that now felt intentional. They spoke, but only about necessary things. Groceries, schedules, logistics. Nothing that required vulnerability. Nothing that required truth. And somehow, that was worse than the confrontation. Ethan had stayed late at the office that evening, not because he needed to, but because there was nothing waiting for him at home except the quiet weight of something unresolved. When he finally left, the city felt different, sharper, more defined, like everything had edges now. He walked without direction at first, hands in his coat pockets, the cold air grounding him in a way the apartment couldn't anymore. And then, almost without thinking, he turned down a street he hadn't planned to take. Claire was already there, standing outside a bookstore, her phone in hand, her expression distant. Ethan slowed as he approached, a strange sense of inevitability settling in his chest. When she looked up and saw him, there was a flicker of surprise, but not confusion. Ethan, she said. Claire. They stood there for a moment, the city moving around them, both of them aware that this wasn't entirely accidental. You come here often? He asked, gesturing lightly toward the bookstore. Sometimes, she replied, when I don't want to go home yet. The honesty of that answer landed quietly between them. Ethan nodded. Yeah, he said, I get that. They ended up walking. No destination, no plan, just movement. At first, the conversation stayed where it had been before, safe, factual, controlled. Have you talked to him? Ethan asked. Claire shook her head. No. Not even after everything? She exhaled softly. What would I say? Ethan didn't have an answer for that, because he hadn't said much either, not really. And you? Claire asked. Vanessa? Ethan let out a quiet breath. We talked, he said, if you can call it that. What does that mean? It means she told the truth, he replied, and somehow that made it harder. Claire glanced at him. Yes, she said, it usually does. They walked past a row of dimly lit restaurants, the sound of laughter and conversation spilling out onto the street. For a moment, Ethan found himself watching a couple sitting by the window, leaning toward each other, smiling, completely absorbed in something simple, something easy. He looked away. I used to think we were like that, he said. Claire followed his gaze briefly, then back to him. We all do, she replied. Ethan shook his head slightly. No, I mean it. We were good, Claire. Not perfect, but solid. Or at least I thought we were. Claire didn't interrupt. She just listened. Somewhere along the way, he continued, we stopped paying attention. Not all at once, just slowly. Like it didn't matter. He paused. And then one day, it didn't. They reached a quiet park, the city noise fading just enough to make space for something deeper. Claire sat down on a bench, and after a moment, Ethan joined her. For a while, neither of them spoke. But this silence felt different. Not empty, not avoidant, just shared. Richard travels a lot, Claire said suddenly. Ethan turned slightly toward her. For work? That's what he says. There was no bitterness in her tone, just resignation. I used to ask questions, she continued, at the beginning. Where he was going, who he was meeting, when he'd be back. And eventually I stopped caring about the answers. Ethan frowned slightly. Or you stopped believing them. Claire gave a faint smile. Same difference. Ethan leaned back, staring up at the dark sky. Vanessa used to tell me everything, he said. Even the small things. Office gossip, random thoughts, things that didn't matter. He paused. Then she stopped. Claire looked at him. Did you ask why? He hesitated. No, he admitted. Why not? Ethan thought about that. Really thought about it. I guess I assumed it was temporary, he said. That things would just go back to normal. Claire nodded slowly. That's how it starts, she said. How what starts? The distance. A cold breeze passed through the park, rustling the bare branches above them. Ethan rubbed his hands together, more out of habit than discomfort. Do you ever think it's partly our fault? He asked. Claire didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was careful. Yes. Ethan looked at her, surprised by the honesty. You do? Yes, she said, but not in the way people usually mean. He waited. I don't think we caused their choices, she continued, but I do think we ignored the signs, the cracks, the things we didn't want to deal with. Ethan nodded slowly. That sounds about right. Claire glanced at him. But that doesn't justify what they did. No, Ethan said firmly, it doesn't. Another pause, longer this time, but neither of them seemed uncomfortable with it. If anything, it felt necessary. I don't miss him, Claire said suddenly. Ethan blinked. What? I don't miss Richard, she repeated. Not the way I thought I would if something like this ever happened. Ethan studied her face. And that scares you? She nodded. Yes. Why? Because it means I lost him a long time ago, she said quietly. I just didn't admit it. Ethan looked down at his hands. I think I'm starting to feel the same way, he said. Claire didn't respond, but the understanding was there, clear, unspoken. The night grew colder, but neither of them moved to leave. Not yet. Because for the first time in days, maybe longer, they didn't feel alone in what they were carrying. You know, Ethan said after a while, when I called you, I thought this was going to be about them. Claire glanced at him. And now? He met her eyes. Now it feels like it's about us. Claire held his gaze for a moment, then looked away. Yes, she said softly, it does. There was something in that shift, something subtle, but undeniable. The conversation had changed. It wasn't just about betrayal anymore, or facts, or explanations. It was about loneliness, about absence, about the quiet ways people disappear from each other long before they actually leave. When they finally stood to go, neither of them rushed. Neither of them tried to define what this was, because naming it would make it real, and they weren't ready for that. Not yet. I'll see you around, Ethan said. Claire hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded. Yes. As they walked in opposite directions, something followed them both. Not guilt, not relief, something in between. A connection born not from desire, but from understanding. And that, in some ways, was far more dangerous. That night, when Ethan returned to the apartment, Vanessa was already asleep, or pretending to be. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her, trying to feel something, anger, pain, anything. But all he felt was distance, the same distance she had been living in for months, maybe longer. Ethan quietly lay down on his side of the bed, the space between them unchanged, but something inside him had shifted, because for the first time, he wasn't the only one carrying it. And across the city, Claire sat by her window, her phone resting beside her. She didn't pick it up, didn't text, didn't call, but she didn't need to, because the silence wasn't as heavy as it used to be. It didn't happen all at once. There was no single moment Ethan could point to later and say, that's when everything changed. No dramatic confession, no impulsive decision. Just a series of small choices, quiet, almost reasonable on their own, that slowly led somewhere neither of them had intended to go. It started with messages, simple at first. Are you okay? Did you talk to her? Rough day. Nothing inappropriate, nothing that crossed any obvious line, but the frequency increased. The pauses between replies grew shorter, and the tone, subtly, almost imperceptibly shifted, from polite concern to something warmer, more personal, more needed. Ethan found himself checking his phone more often than he should. Not for work, not for Vanessa, for Claire. It unsettled him, not because it felt wrong, but because it felt right. And that was worse. One night it rained, the kind of steady, unrelenting rain that turned the city into reflections and shadows. Ethan stood by the window of his apartment, watching the water streak down the glass, his phone in his hand. Vanessa wasn't home. She hadn't said where she was going. He hadn't asked. That silence between them had become mutual now, balanced, cold. His phone buzzed. Claire, do you ever feel like everything you thought was solid just wasn't? Ethan stared at the message for a moment, then typed back. Ethan, lately? All the time. The reply came almost instantly. Claire, I hate how quickly it changes. Like none of it meant what I thought it did. Ethan exhaled slowly. His fingers hovered over the screen before he typed. Ethan, maybe it did, just not in the way we believed. 3 dots appeared, disappeared. Then came her response. Claire, that sounds like something you say when you're trying to make peace with something you can't fix. Ethan almost smiled, because she wasn't wrong. They met again that night, not planned, not exactly, just implied. The bar was quiet, tucked away from the louder parts of the city. Low lights, soft music, the kind of place where conversation stayed close to the table. Claire was already there when Ethan arrived. She looked up as he approached, her expression softening in a way that felt familiar now. Hey, she said. Hey. He sat across from her, but it didn't feel like distance anymore, not like before. What are we doing? Claire asked after a moment. Ethan blinked slightly. What do you mean? She held his gaze. This, she said. Us meeting like this, talking every day. There was no accusation in her voice, just honesty. Ethan leaned back slightly, considering. I don't know, he admitted. Claire nodded, as if she had expected that. That's what worries me, she said. A waiter came by. They ordered drinks. Neither of them really paid attention to what, because the conversation mattered more. It's not supposed to feel like this, Claire said quietly once they were alone again. Ethan frowned. Like what? Easy. That word lingered between them. Ethan looked at her. At home, she continued, everything feels heavy, complicated, like every word has consequences. He nodded slowly. Yeah. But here, she said, with you, she hesitated. Then, it's simple. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest, because he felt it too, and that was the problem. That doesn't mean it's right, Claire added quickly. Ethan let out a quiet breath. No, he agreed, it doesn't. Silence settled for a moment. Then he said, do you think we're doing this because of them? Claire didn't answer immediately. She looked down at her glass, tracing the rim with her finger. Partly, she admitted, at the beginning. And now? She looked up at him, and for a moment, there was no hesitation. I don't think so, she said. The honesty of that moment shifted something, subtle but undeniable. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his voice lower now. That's the part I don't understand, he said, because if this was just about revenge, it would feel different. Claire held his gaze. Yes, she said softly. It would. Messier, he added. Angrier. Temporary. Claire nodded. But this doesn't feel temporary. The words hung between them. Dangerous. Real. Ethan sat back, running a hand through his hair. "This is the part where we're supposed to stop," he said. Claire gave a faint, almost sad smile. "Yes," she said, "it is." Neither of them moved. Neither of them stood up. Neither of them said goodbye. Because stopping would require distance, and distance was the one thing neither of them wanted anymore. Later, when they stepped outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement, everything blurred and softened. They stood there for a moment under the awning, close, but not touching. "Ethan," Claire said quietly. He turned to her. "We need to be careful." The words echoed something else, something familiar, something that had started all of this. Ethan let out a quiet breath. "Yeah," he said, "I know." But neither of them moved away. There was a pause, a long one, the kind where something is about to happen, or not. Claire's hand shifted slightly at her side, not reaching, not pulling away, just there. Ethan noticed, of course he did, and for a brief second he thought about it, what it would mean, what it would change, what it would confirm. Then he stepped back, just slightly, not rejection, not fear, just control. Claire noticed, and something in her expression softened. Relief, maybe, or gratitude. "This is how it starts," she said quietly. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, and if we're not careful, we become them," he finished. Claire held his gaze. "Yes." Another pause. Then she smiled. Not brightly, not fully, but genuinely. "I don't want that," she said. Ethan shook his head. "Me neither." They said goodnight. No lingering, no unnecessary words. Just a quiet understanding. But as Ethan walked away, something stayed with him. Not guilt, not regret. Something more complicated. Because for the first time since everything had fallen apart, he felt connected. And that terrified him. That night, lying in bed beside Vanessa, Ethan stared at the ceiling again. The same space between them, the same silence. But he didn't feel the same anymore, because now he knew what it felt like to not be alone. And across the city, Claire stood in front of a mirror, her reflection staring back at her. For years, she had been careful, controlled, loyal, even when it hurt, even when it was lonely. But now, something had shifted. A line had been crossed. Not physically, not yet, but emotionally, there was no denying it anymore. She closed her eyes briefly, and for the first time, she wasn't sure if she wanted to step back. Because sometimes, the most dangerous betrayals don't begin with touch. They begin with understanding. The shift didn't happen overnight. It built slowly, like pressure beneath the surface. Quiet, invisible, until suddenly everything began to crack. Vanessa noticed it first, not because Ethan changed dramatically, but because he stopped trying. There were no more questions, no more attempts to reach her, to understand, to fix. He moved through the apartment with the same detached calm she had once carried so effortlessly. Conversations became transactional. Eye contact became brief, almost accidental. It was subtle, but unmistakable. And for the first time since everything had been exposed, Vanessa felt it. The absence. "You've been out a lot," she said one evening, leaning against the kitchen counter, arms crossed. Ethan didn't look up from his phone. "Work," he replied. The word landed between them, familiar, empty. Vanessa's lips pressed together slightly. "That's what I used to say," she said. Ethan glanced up at her then, just for a second. "I know." There was no accusation in his voice, no edge, and somehow that made it worse. Vanessa studied him carefully. Something was different. Not anger, not sadness. Something quieter, more final. "Are you seeing someone?" she asked. The question came out steadier than she expected. Ethan didn't react immediately. He set his phone down slowly, his movements deliberate. Then he met her eyes. "What makes you ask that?" Vanessa held his gaze. "Because I know what distance looks like," she said. A pause. Then, softer, "And this feels familiar." Ethan considered her for a long moment. There were a dozen ways he could answer. Deny it, deflect, turn it back on her. But none of those felt right anymore. Not after everything. "I've been spending time with someone," he said finally. Vanessa's expression didn't break, but something in her posture stiffened. "Who?" she asked. Ethan hesitated, not because he didn't want to tell her, but because saying it out loud would make everything real in a way that couldn't be undone. "Claire," he said. Vanessa frowned slightly. "Claire?" Then it clicked. Her face went still. "Claire Halvorsen?" she asked. Ethan nodded once. The silence that followed was heavier than anything they had shared before. Because this wasn't just betrayal. It was symmetry. Vanessa let out a quiet, almost disbelieving breath. "Wow," she murmured. Ethan watched her carefully. "You don't get to act surprised," he said. "I'm not surprised," she replied quickly. "I just didn't think you were that kind of person." Ethan tilted his head slightly. "And what kind of person is that?" The kind who does this, she said, gesturing vaguely between them. Who crosses that line. Ethan let out a small, humorless laugh. That's interesting, he said, coming from you. Vanessa's jaw tightened. That's different. Is it? Yes. How? She hesitated, and for the first time she didn't have a clear answer. It just is, she said finally, though her voice lacked conviction. Ethan nodded slowly. Right. Another pause. Then Vanessa stepped closer. This isn't you, Ethan, she said. You don't do things like this. Ethan met her gaze. You mean I don't betray people? He asked. Vanessa flinched slightly. That's not what I meant. But it's what you said. I meant, she stopped, exhaling sharply. I meant you're better than this. Ethan's expression shifted. Not anger, not even hurt, just clarity. I was, he said quietly. That landed harder than anything else. Vanessa looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time she saw it. The distance she had created, reflected back at her. Is it serious? She asked after a moment. Ethan didn't answer right away, because he didn't know how to define it. What he had with Claire wasn't simple, wasn't reckless, wasn't even fully formed, but it was real, and that was enough. I don't know, he said honestly. Vanessa nodded slowly. That's worse, she murmured. Across the city, something similar was unfolding, but quieter, colder. Richard Halvorsen stood by the window of his office overlooking the skyline, his reflection faintly visible against the glass. Claire sat across from his desk, her posture composed, her expression unreadable. You've been distant, Richard said, not turning around. Claire didn't respond immediately. I've been busy, she said. He smiled slightly, a small, knowing smile. Don't do that, he said. That's my line. Claire's lips pressed together. I'm not in the mood for games, Richard. At that, he finally turned. His expression was calm, controlled, but there was something beneath it now, something sharper. Neither am I, he said. The room felt colder. He walked slowly toward his desk, resting his hands against the edge. Did someone say something to you? He asked. Claire met his gaze. No. Then what is this? She tilted her head slightly. What is what? This, he said, gesturing toward her. This shift. Claire held his eyes for a long moment. Then, maybe I'm just tired. Richard studied her. Of what? She didn't hesitate. Of pretending. That caught him off guard, just enough. Pretending what? He asked. That everything is fine, she said. That I don't see what's right in front of me. A pause. Then, quietly, that you think I don't know. Richard's expression hardened slightly. Know what? Claire almost smiled, but there was no humor in it. You can say her name, she said. Another pause, longer this time. Then, Vanessa. The air shifted, sharp, unforgiving. Richard didn't deny it, not immediately, because he understood something important in that moment. This wasn't suspicion anymore. This was confirmation. And how long have you known? He asked. Claire leaned back slightly in her chair. Long enough, she said. His jaw tightened. And you didn't think to mention it? Claire let out a soft breath. What would have been the point? Silence fell between them, but it wasn't empty. It was full of everything they hadn't said for years. You're overreacting, Richard said finally, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. Claire shook her head. No, she said. I think I'm finally reacting the right way. Back in the apartment, Ethan stood alone in the living room. Vanessa had gone into the bedroom. The door was closed. Not slammed, not dramatic, just closed. His phone buzzed. A message. Claire. I told him. Ethan stared at the screen. Then Ethan. Yeah, me too. A pause. Then her reply. Claire. How did it go? Ethan glanced toward the bedroom door. Then typed. Exactly how you'd expect. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then Claire. This is where everything falls apart, isn't it? Ethan looked around the apartment, at the life he had built, at the silence that filled it now. Then he typed. I think it already did. Across the city, Claire sat alone in her car again, her phone resting in her hand, her reflection staring back at her through the glass. But this time, there was no uncertainty left, no hesitation, no illusion, because the truth had finally surfaced, on all sides. And now, there was nothing left to hold it together. Only the question of what would remain when everything collapsed. It happened on a Sunday, not planned, not formally arranged, but inevitable. The apartment felt different that morning. Still, heavy, as if something had already been decided long before anyone said it out loud. Vanessa stood by the window, arms folded, staring out at the quiet street below. The city seemed slower on Sundays, less urgent, more reflective. Behind her, Ethan moved through the kitchen with quiet precision, pouring coffee he didn't really want. Neither of them had slept much. Neither of them had said much either, because they both knew this wasn't something that could be resolved in fragments anymore. The knock at the door came just after 10. Soft, measured. Ethan didn't need to ask who it was. He walked over, pausing briefly before opening it. Richard Halvorsen stood there, perfectly composed, as always. Claire stood beside him, equally calm, equally controlled. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Ethan stepped aside. "Come in." They gathered in the living room. 4 people, 2 marriages, one truth that had already unraveled everything. Vanessa turned slowly from the window, her eyes landing first on Richard, then on Claire. There was a flicker of something in her expression. Not guilt, not fear, recognition. No one sat down at first, as if doing so would make this feel like a conversation. And it wasn't, not really. Richard was the first to speak. "I think we all know why we're here." His voice was steady, controlled, but there was a tightness beneath it. Ethan leaned against the edge of the table, arms crossed. "Yeah," he said, "we do." Claire glanced briefly at Ethan, just a second, but it was enough. Vanessa noticed. Of course she did. Her gaze shifted between them, then settled on Ethan. "You told him," she said quietly. Ethan didn't look away. "Yes." A pause. "Then I told you too." Vanessa exhaled slowly, turning her attention to Claire now. "And you?" she asked. "You're just okay with this?" Claire held her gaze. "No," she said calmly. "I'm not okay with any of this." "Then why are you here?" Another pause. Then Claire answered. "Because pretending hasn't worked so far." That landed. Soft, but sharp. Richard stepped forward slightly, his eyes on Ethan now. "So," he said, "you and my wife." There was no anger in his tone, just a statement. Ethan nodded once. "Yes." Vanessa let out a quiet, almost disbelieving breath. "Wow," she murmured again, though this time it sounded different. Less surprised, more hollow. Richard studied Ethan carefully. "For how long?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "A few weeks." "And you thought that was a good idea?" Ethan met his gaze. "I didn't think it was an idea at all." A flicker of irritation crossed Richard's face. "Then what was it?" Ethan paused, because this was the moment, the one where he could simplify it, reduce it, call it a mistake, a reaction, something temporary. But that wouldn't be true, and for the first time, truth felt more important than comfort. "It was real," Ethan said. The room went still. Not louder, not more chaotic, just heavier. Vanessa looked at him sharply. "Real?" she repeated. Ethan turned to her. "Yes." Her eyes searched his face. "For what?" she asked. "A few conversations? A few drinks?" Ethan didn't react to the edge in her voice. "It wasn't about that," he said. "Then what was it about?" Ethan glanced briefly at Claire, then back at Vanessa. "It was about being seen," he said quietly. The words echoed, familiar, unavoidable. Vanessa's expression shifted, because she recognized them. She had said them first. Claire didn't look away this time. She let the moment exist, unprotected. Richard let out a slow breath, shaking his head slightly. "That's what we're calling it now," he said. "You betray your spouse and suddenly it's meaningful?" Claire turned to him. "Yes," she said simply. That caught him off guard. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," she replied. "You don't get to dismiss this as something trivial." Richard's jaw tightened. "Oh, I don't?" "No," Claire said, "because if it was trivial, you wouldn't have hidden it." Silence. Sharp, precise. Vanessa stepped back slightly, her arms folding tighter across her chest. "This is insane," she said. "All of it." Ethan looked at her. "Is it?" "Yes," she snapped. "You're acting like this is something justified." "I'm not justifying it." "Then what are you doing?" Ethan paused. "Then I'm not pretending it's something it's not." Vanessa stared at him. "And what is it?" Ethan held her gaze. "Something that didn't come from nothing." That was the part she couldn't argue with, because neither had hers. Richard let out a short, humorless laugh. "So what now?" he asked. "We all just accept this? Move on like it's normal?" "No," Claire said. All eyes turned to her. She stood there, calm but unwavering. "We stop pretending," she said. Vanessa frowned. "What does that mean?" Claire looked at her. "It means we admit what this is," she said. "All of it. The distance, the choices, the fact that none of this started overnight." Ethan watched her as she spoke, noticing the steadiness in her voice, the clarity. We built something that stopped working, Claire continued, and instead of fixing it or ending it, we ignored it. She glanced at Richard, until ignoring it wasn't possible anymore. No one interrupted, because there was nothing to interrupt, only truth. Vanessa looked down for a moment, then back up. So what are you saying, she asked, that this is just the natural outcome? Claire shook her head slightly. No, she said, I'm saying this is the result of a lot of choices we didn't make. Another silence, but this one felt different, less tense, more final. Ethan pushed himself away from the table, standing fully now. I'm not here to fight, he said. Richard scoffed slightly. Could have fooled me. Ethan ignored it. I'm here because this is already over, he continued. Vanessa looked at him. What is? Ethan met her eyes. This, he said simply. The word settled, heavy, irreversible. Vanessa didn't argue, didn't react immediately, because deep down she knew. Richard looked between them, his expression harder now. So that's it? He asked. You just walk away? Ethan glanced at Claire, then back at him. Yes. Claire didn't speak, but she didn't look away either, because this wasn't about winning or losing or even choosing sides. It was about finally letting something end that had already been gone for a long time. No one said goodbye, no dramatic exits, no final words. Just four people standing in the quiet aftermath of truth. And for the first time, there was nothing left to hide behind. Time didn't fix anything, it just made everything clearer. 3 months later, New York moved on the way it always did. Indifferent, relentless, untouched by the quiet implosions happening behind apartment doors and office glass. But for them, nothing was the same. Vanessa Caldwell stood in front of her bathroom mirror, staring at a version of herself she didn't quite recognize anymore. The apartment was quieter now. Not the tense, suffocating silence she had shared with Ethan in those final weeks, but an emptier kind, one that echoed. Ethan had moved out a month after the confrontation. No dramatic goodbye, no attempt to fix things, just a conversation that felt more like paperwork than emotion. And then, absence. Vanessa picked up her phone, scrolling through contacts she no longer called. Friends had chosen sides, quietly. Work had changed too. Not publicly, no scandal, no official consequences, but people knew. They always did. The glances lingered longer, the conversation softened when she entered the room. Respect hadn't disappeared, but something underneath it had shifted, something she couldn't rebuild with confidence or charm. And Richard? Richard had lost more than he expected. His office still overlooked the city, the same skyline, the same power, but the illusion of control was gone. Claire had left, not loudly, not dramatically, just decisively. A signed document, a packed suitcase, a door that didn't reopen. At work the distance followed him, not because of the affair itself, but because of how it had unraveled. Quietly, publicly enough. In a world where perception was everything, Richard had made the one mistake he always believed he was too careful to make. He lost control of the narrative. Now he stood in the same place he once commanded, but it felt different. Because power without certainty wasn't power at all. Across the city, in a smaller, quieter apartment, Ethan Caldwell sat by the window, a sketchbook open on his lap. The lines on the page were incomplete, intentional. He had started over in more ways than one. New place, new routine, new silence. But this silence felt different. It wasn't empty. It was his. He had thought about Vanessa, more than he expected. Not with anger, not even with regret. Just distance. The kind that comes when something finally settles into its truth. They had tried, once. And then, somewhere along the way, they stopped. His phone buzzed on the table beside him. He didn't need to check to know who it was. Still, he did. Claire, are you free? Ethan stared at the message for a moment, then typed back, yeah. They met at the same park, the same bench, but everything felt different now. Lighter, clearer, and somehow more uncertain. Claire was already there when he arrived. She looked up as he approached, a small genuine smile forming. Not forced, not careful, just real. Hey, she said. Hey. Ethan sat beside her, leaving just enough space between them. Not out of distance, but out of awareness. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them wasn't heavy anymore, but it wasn't simple either. How have you been? Claire asked. Ethan considered the question. Better, he said. Not perfect, but better. She nodded. I get that. He glanced at her. And you? Claire exhaled softly, looking out at the trees. Free, she said. Then, after a pause, and terrified. Ethan smiled slightly. Yeah, he said. That sounds about right. They sat in silence for a moment, but it wasn't the kind they used to fear. It didn't need to be filled. This is different now, Claire said eventually. Ethan nodded. Yeah, no more secrets. No more excuses. Claire turned to him. No more reasons. That was the part that mattered, because before, there had always been something else, something external, something broken that had brought them together. Now, it was just them. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her. At the woman who had understood him when everything else felt like it was falling apart. At the connection that had started in the worst possible way, but had never felt false. What do you want this to be? He asked. Claire didn't answer immediately, because this time the answer mattered more. I don't want it to be a reaction, she said finally. Ethan nodded. Me neither. I don't want it to be about them, she continued. It's not, he said. Claire held his gaze. Are you sure? Ethan thought about that, about everything that had led them here. The betrayal, the anger, the understanding, the quiet moments that had nothing to do with any of that. Then he said, yes. Claire studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay. Another pause, but this one felt different, like a beginning instead of an ending. Ethan shifted slightly, his hand resting on the bench between them, not reaching, not pulling away, just there. Claire noticed. Of course she did. She looked at his hand for a moment, then back at him, and this time, when her fingers moved, they didn't hesitate. They rested lightly against his. Not a grasp, not a claim, just contact. Ethan didn't move, didn't react, because he understood what it meant. Not urgency, not desperation, not escape, choice. For a while, they sat there like that, quiet, still. No need to define it further, because whatever this was, it didn't need to be rushed, didn't need to be justified, didn't need to be explained. It just needed to be real. As the sun dipped lower behind the buildings, casting long shadows across the park, Ethan leaned back slightly, exhaling a slow breath. Claire's hand remained against his, steady, present. And for the first time since everything had fallen apart, there was no weight attached to it. No past pulling at it, no guilt shaping it, no illusion holding it together. Just two people, sitting in the quiet aftermath of everything they had lost, and everything they had chosen to keep. Because in the end, what remains isn't always what we started with. Sometimes, it's what we finally allow ourselves to have.